By now we have discussed ideology and its role in social movements, and we also discussed the three broad ideological trends in Indian environmentalism or Indian environmental movements. It is the Gandhian ideas, Marxian ideas, and appropriate technocratic ideas. These three are the dominant or the important ideological trends in Indian environmentalism. But these three ideological trends are quite different from each other. Let us see that how they differ from each other based on certain selected indicators. Let us see that how these three are different from each other with regard to their attitude towards modern science and technology. For Gandhians or for crusading Gandhians, science is the brick in the edifice of industrial society. It is the cause of environmental degradation. Or Gandhian ideologies reject modern science or reject Western views of industrialism. Gandhian ideas talk about village republic, it talk about ecological harmony, and it talk about a symbiotic relationship with nature, and it emphasizes on rural development practices. Whereas the Marxist or ecological Marxist, they are the admirers and worshippers of modern science and technology, because for them emancipation for the downtrodden or empowerment for the downtrodden can only be achieved with the help of industry or industrial technology, and it is the industrial technology which are considered by ecological Marxists as an instrument to dismantle the unequal social order. So, therefore, the central problem for ecological Marxists is that of inequality, and they consider science or they consider technology as an instrument with which that social, economic and political inequality can be dismantled, and therefore, Marxians are the front runners in their appreciation for technology and rejection of traditional ways of life or traditional methods. With regard to appropriate technocrats, they are perhaps more judicious. They call for a pragmatic approach towards modern science and traditional knowledge. They try to combine or they try to make a balance between the modern science and the traditional knowledge, and the emphasis is on efficiently using the resources, efficiently managing the resources with the help of required or appropriate technology. So, therefore, appropriate technocrats talk about reviving traditional knowledge, they talk about reviving traditional knowledge of water conservation, reviving traditional knowledge of ecological harmony, and the emphasis is on using labor intensive technologies, using limited technologies, and conserving or preserving resources as well as delivering benefits to the people. So, therefore, with regard to their approach towards science, with regard to the approach toward technology, appropriate technocrats perhaps take a middle ground where they do not outrightly reject modern science and modern technology, but at the same time try to ensure that science and technology can be used for betterment of the people. So, therefore, they believe in popularizing science, they believe in popular science where science becomes an instrument for people, where science becomes a strategy with which we can help people or with which we can extend the benefits of resources to the people. The second difference between these three important ideological trends is with regard to their scale of activism. As we discussed in the beginning, that ideology not only defines the movement, but also guides its form of action. So, therefore, based on these three ideological trends or based on these three ideological orientations, environmental movements in India also differ with regard to their strategies of action, with regard to their strategy of mobilization. Crusading Gandhians or environmental Gandhians have relatively a larger reach, because they organize environmental tours, they organize padayatras, they march or they organize foot march, and they cover a wider areas of resources. So, perhaps environmental Gandhians can be best described as think globally and act locally. They work in the villages, they work with the people, but the ideas that environmental Gandhians try to portray, the belief system that they rely on is bringing an harmonious relationship with nature. In that sense, they think globally and act locally. And environmental Gandhians, with regard to their activism, environmental Gandhians are more inclined towards working at the grassroots, working along with the people in the villages, whereas ecological Marxism, due to their ideological orientation, work in an intermediary range, and they organize mostly people in the areas of mining, in the areas of industry, and therefore the scale of activism for them is not in the villages, but maybe in the nearby towns, maybe in the cities, where they try to mobilize on the issues of pollution, they try to mobilize on the issues of environmental impacts or negative health impacts of environmental degradation on the working class, and the participants in this case are mostly derived from the working class category. So, therefore, class inequality and unequal access to resources, they become central issues for ecological Marxism, and accordingly their forms of action or strategy of action also differs quite significantly from that of the environmental Gandhians or the crusading Gandhians. With regard to the appropriate technocrats, they prefer to work in a micro scale. Perhaps they can best be characterized as act locally and think locally, because the scale of activity, the scale of activism for appropriate technocrats is at the grassroots level. They try to mobilize the villagers, they try to mobilize people at the grassroots, and with the use of simple technologies, with the use of appropriate technologies, they try to derive benefits to the people and conserve natural resources. So, therefore, these appropriate technocrats demonstrate the ability for an alternative model of economic development at the local level using science and technology, which are perhaps more apt for the local situation. So, therefore, we may find that appropriate technocrats talk about nature conservation activities, water conservation activities, they talk about reforestation. So, basically the idea is using science and scientific knowledge for the betterment of the people along with the people. So, therefore, here science not only becomes an instrument for the people, but science is also applied at the local level, and people themselves become a part of the scientific movement. So, therefore, appropriate technocrats try to popularize science where people, ordinary people, common people can also join these science based movements. The third difference between these ideological strands is with regard to their sector of activism, at where they are more popular, at where they are more active. Gandhians are otherwise known as rural romantics. They have a tendency to work along with people in the villages, and Gandhian ideologies of Gram Swaraj, Gandhian ideologies of rural development basically focuses on developing democracies or developing grassroots democracies. The emphasis is on agrarian society or agrarian environmental problems, whereas the Marxists are more popular to work with the working class. So, therefore, they take up issues like mining, they take up issues like workplace safety, they take up issues like pollution and negative health impacts or negative health hazards of any industrialization or any kind of science and technological factors. With regard to the appropriate technocrats, they, as I told, take a middle way, and they are in favor of industrialization. They argue for industrialization, but not at the cost of natural resources, not at the cost of the resource base. So, therefore, what they emphasize is small scale labor intensive technologies. So, here technology is applied which aims at rural reconstruction, which aims at reviving the traditional knowledge, or which aims at relieving the drudgery of the poor. So, the appropriate technocrats mostly work at the grassroots level, at the micro level, use small scale technologies for preservation of resources and for delivering benefits to the people. With regard to the appropriate technocrats, they, as I told, take a middle way, and they are in favor of industrialization. They argue for industrialization, but not at the cost of natural resources, not at the cost of the resource base. So, therefore, what they emphasize is small scale labor intensive technologies. So, here technology is applied which aims at rural reconstruction, which aims at reviving the traditional knowledge, or which aims at relieving the drudgery of the poor. So, the appropriate technocrats mostly work at the grassroots level, at the micro level, use small scale technologies for preservation of resources and for delivering benefits to the people. So, to summarize this part of the lecture, we may say that these three broad ideological trends differ from each other on three important grounds. They differ from each other with regard to their ideology, towards modern science, towards modern technology and tradition. While Gandhians are in favor, or while Gandhians consider tradition as an inspiration, as a source of knowledge for ecological harmony, Marxists perhaps consider technology, modern scientific knowledge, as a strategy, a tool for emancipation. Secondly, with regard to the scale of activism or the forms of activism, Gandhians rely more on non-violent protest, Gandhians rely more on protest at the grassroots level, at the village level, whereas environmental Marxists rely more on direct confrontation, and they work more with working class and take up problems related to industrialization, for example, industrial pollution, health hazards and work safety. Whereas appropriate technocrats rely more on small scale technologies to derive or to develop or to derive or deliver benefits to the people. And finally, these three ideological trends differ with regard to their scale of activism. We may find crusading Gandhians at the villages, at the grassroots level, whereas ecological Marxists work more with factory, more with working class, and the reach of Gandhians is perhaps more than the ecological Marxists in the Indian context. So, to summarize and conclude this lecture, in this class we discuss that ideology is crucial for any social movement because it defines the movement, constructs an identity and influences the strategy of action. So, therefore, ideological trends or ideological perspectives are important in the Indian environmental movements or Indian formation of environmental ideologies. As we just discussed, that Ramchandra Guha identifies 7 broad ideological trends or ideological perspectives in Indian environmentalism or environmental movement. However, he mentions that the dominant or important ideological trends relates to issues of resource capture and issues of equality and inequality over resources, and therefore he identifies 3 important ideological orientations in Indian environmentalism: the crusading Gandhians, the ecological Marxists and the appropriate technocrats. And these 3 ideological trends are not only different with regard to their ideas, with regard to beliefs, but more importantly they are also different with regard to the kind of message that they provide and the way in which they guide or way in which they influence the course of the action, the protest strategies or the mobilization strategies of these movements. So, therefore, we may conclude that ideology plays a crucial role in Indian environmental movements, and it is these ideological trends which define Indian environmental movements, give a specific characteristics to it and decide their forms of action and strategies of mobilization. With regard to the readings for this lecture, I have identified 2 important readings. Both are written by Ramchandra Guha. You may read Ramchandra Guha's book Ecology and Equity, as well as you may also read Ramchandra Guha's paper on EPW, published in EPW, titled as Ideological Trends in Indian Environmentalism. Thank you.